So, I want to talk about feedback and the different types of feedback and how between working and the human aspect. And we'll start with your thoughts.
Well, I think you can see it in two ways. There's the feedback you get from day-to-day work as an engineer. So you've got the systems feedback from your production systems, but you've also got your IDE giving you instant feedback and your code inspectors, and then you've got the code review, and there's more and more sort of automation and more opportunities to get feedback along the way on how we're doing with our work. But then there's also things like our performance and the discussions with managers and that human side of things. When if you're having a code review, for example, and it's coming back with lots of comments, how you sort of navigate some giving feedback and receiving feedback when it's not necessarily the feedback that you want.
Yeah, that's always it's a good challenge, right?
Yeah,
we get it a lot. I see. I like what you say about tying the two things together and the approach, because I think as engineers and developers, we're so used to getting that instant feedback now, and you see it, and we know how helpful it is to really help us be effective and efficient. Don't know about you, but I've worked on things in the past where to get your feedback, you have to you run something, maybe even if you had to go and compile it, and then you had to upload it to somewhere, a different environment. You go in there, you have to go, and that's where you go to run it, and then you finally find there was like a tiny bug somewhere. You have to bring it back, and that feedback loop can take like an hour. I've seen places it actually can take multiple days in some instances, and we know that that's not good, and so it's trying to bring that back and make it as fast and as real time as you can for the development side. And I think it also connects to the human side. The human feedback is that the annual performance review is fine. It's good to have that as an anchor, but it's no good saying, remember that thing you did 11 months ago? It would be better if you had done this differently.
Yeah.
Right? It's no help to anyone.
Yeah, I mean that's where the annual performance review, there should be no surprises in there, because ideally you want to have feedback through every step, and through honest, through direct conversations with the manager and with your peers, but also conversations that are done with a little bit of compassion, because you can ruin somebody's life with too much feedback or too direct feedback. It depends upon their sensitivity. So that's where the human judgment comes in as to sort of what's going to be helpful to somebody in their growth and their development, versus what's just making a point and being right. So it's like that. It's like how to give feedback. It's a fine art. It's a subtle art, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. There's a subtlety there which is what sets it apart from the IDE type of feedback, which is it's binary, right? It works or it doesn't. Whereas with the human feedback, it's much more ambiguity. There's more nuance there.
Yeah.
Say for when's a good time to give the feedback and receive it, and how to approach it and how to give it, and it's different for different people, and it's kind of learning how to interact with different people in the way that works for them. How do they take the feedback?
And I think even giving feedback can be as stressful as receiving it. And somebody that's wanting to do the right thing, wanting to be supportive, but has got some difficult topic to broach, it can ruin their week. They can spend a lot of time anticipating an upcoming meeting where they've got to deliver something, some negative feedback, let's call it, and so that whole intent around wanting to create a kind of a feedback culture needs to be done really carefully and managed well, because there's human sensitivities on both sides of that feedback loop.
Yes, yeah, you say that really comes down to your comfort levels with having difficult conversations in a way, because it's very easy to give the positive feedback. You did great. This is amazing. That's perfect. But people really grow from we all know this, right? You grow from things that didn't work, right?
Yeah,
And that's how you learn is from the mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, in a way, making sure you've got a culture where it's okay to make mistakes, and where the feedback is frequent and flowing, and is acceptable. It becomes normal, as you say, so you don't have that big fear of. I've been there as a manager myself. It's that having that difficult conversation is kind of like, I know this conversation is going to upset that person.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're going to get some effectively bad news about something.
Yeah, and I think there's another angle on that. There's always going to be a subjectivity to whatever feedback you get, and your manager's view might not be the most constructive feedback. And I think it's almost a kind of like a triangulation of different people's perspectives to get to some sort of judgment of what the truth is. So I think it's a good practice to seek multiple sources of input and realize that everyone has their own sort of perception of reality, perception of priorities and what's important and what's relevant, and we've all got we've got blind spots. That's why we want feedback to sort of fill in some of our blind spots. But we've got to remember that the person who's giving feedback also has blind spots and prejudices, and it's getting a balance of being curious about what's closest to the truth.
Yes, a super important point. So, because we've almost been saying feedback is one directional, right? It's top down, whereas it's really not.
Yeah.
Good feedback it's multi-directional, right? It is top down, but it's bottom up, it's side to side, and it's all around.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have that. The culture of feedback does go both ways. Mm-hmm. And something we used to do was, at the end of a project, we'd have so at the end of a project, we would just have a big feedback. Everybody said this person did this really well. They could probably improve this thing. So it was, as you say, it's rounded feedback, not just one person's opinion of what this person didn't do well, or and there's the other aspect, I suppose, which is kind of how you act on the feedback as well, how you integrate it into your learning, your day-to-day approach, and it's I've been in so many retrospectives, for example, where we're talking about what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, what we're going to change, but yet do we actually implement anything from that retrospective without it can just feel like a ceremony that you turn up to and you participate in, but then you just end up doing the same stuff. So I think there has to be some level of intentionality around wanting to utilize the learnings, and that comes from culture and habits. What are the habits of the organization? Are we talking about constantly improving and learning from what we're doing? Yeah, that culture is, he says, it's very important, and that often will come from a manager. They set the tone of the culture, and as the leader and the manager, it's really important to then, as you say, take feedback yourself and make sure it needs to be kind of visible that you are acting on that feedback, right? That's cool.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you end up with it's a sort of a deaf culture. People won't bother giving you feedback because you don't do anything with it.
It's modelling. The manager, the leader. It's a question of modelling the behaviours, the actions, the kinds of decisions that you aspire to culturally, and that's realising that there can't be any sort of transgressions to that. Nobody gets a ticket to get away with not following that sort of cultural intent.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I quite like the sort of skateboard analogy with feedback. It's the skateboarder, the feeling of skateboarding is, you know, when you're doing it well, it's like you get into that flow state, and that's a lovely state to be in as an engineer as well. But you get that flow state on a skateboard by getting that immediate feedback, making the adjustments according to the terrain and what you're trying to do, and then you fall off and get some bumps and bruises. Short-term pain, but a long-term way of harnessing that for improvement.
Yeah, I think it is an important lesson, is that important feedback is a bit painful at times, and that's the thing you need to learn from. But like you say, it can't all just be positive feedback. You know, if you never fall off your skateboard or hurt yourself somehow, you're probably not trying hard enough.
Yeah.
But if all you ever get are bumps and bruises and broken bones, right, you're gonna give up.
Yeah.
Right. You're not. Because there's no enjoyment there either. You need to have the right balance of positive feedback and, let's call it, growth feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think another a trick to that is just not becoming too attached to your work. And I think of an artist that wants to, you know, they'll paint something or sculpt something, and then it will hang in a gallery or it will be on display somewhere, and they have to sort of almost let go of their artwork when it's being seen. And the same with code. I mean, code is always going to change in the future, and we want to own the code that we're doing, but without getting attached to it. So be responsible for it and have some sort of ownership and commitment to what we're trying to do, but also being a little bit non-attached in that when we're getting feedback, it's not necessarily our identity or our ego that's being attacked. We need to sort of like separate our identity and our sense of our competence away from that momentary sort of feedback, because, you know, with that sense of separation, then we can use that in a more constructive way to learn from and change.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I guess what we're saying is it's a really nuanced area that we probably don't discuss enough in work situations. We just take, it's giving and receiving feedback is just part of it, but we probably don't often have much opportunity to sort of talk about, well, what are some of the nuances of that? How do people struggle with it? What obstacles do they come up against when they're trying to navigate the whole feedback thing? Yeah,
you say feedback. It's one of those things we just take for granted, and companies take for granted that it happens. But it's, there's an art to it, and there's a skill to it to learn. And, I think managers are often sold short when it comes to this, right? They just got thrown in the deep end of, well, you've been on the receiving end of performance review, so I'm sure you know how to give feedback, positive and negative, build a feedback culture. And there's I feel bad for managers. Having been there myself, it's a hard thing to learn to do.
Yeah, it's that coaching, that gentle steering and coaching and knowing and being able to judge, the timing and the tone and the responses from who you're talking to. It's all sort of delicate dynamics of management and work.
Yeah, absolutely. Before you go, I would like to ask you a quick favour, if I may. If you enjoyed this discussion, even one little light bulb moment or perhaps a raised eyebrow, please consider just liking this video or even subscribing to the channel. I can't begin to tell you how useful it is for John and I to get this as we grow and develop this channel and human-centric engineering in general. Also, if you're interested in what we do and want to find out more, just check out our website at human-centricengineering.com. We'll put a link somewhere. Thank you so much. Your engagement really does help.